From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Today we'll learn how Project Return is helping people leaving incarceration get into stable housing.
We are seeing so many individuals coming through Project Return who did not know where they were going to be staying at, did not have viable abilities to be able to attain housing.
Then we'll join a City of Milwaukee crew working to keep our trees healthy while adapting to climate change.
We get a lot more severe storms, and it's really important that we maintain our trees properly, especially pruning trees, to withstand the rigors of those, more severe storms.
Plus, Bubbler Talk will take a stroll through downtown Milwaukee's skywalk system. All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. But first, here are today's headlines. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. When people in Milwaukee County return to the community after incarceration, nearly half of them need housing assistance. That's why Project Return, an organization that helps formerly incarcerated people, is now providing them with a place to live and other resources to help prevent recidivism. In downtown Milwaukee near the courthouse, 12 apartments will house people for up to 6 months, where they can receive on-site resources and support. The first residents are moving in tomorrow. WUWM's Eddie Morales is joined by Project Return Executive Director Wendell Rishka and Housing Director Sarah Williams.
Housing's always been a huge issue for individuals returning from incarceration, and it just has begun to spike even more so. We are seeing so many individuals coming through Project Return who did not know where they were going to be staying at, did not have viable abilities to be able to attain housing, could not afford, the 1 month rent, the security deposit, all that stuff. And we were working with local landlords to be able to try to address that need. A few years back, actually, we had one of our major funders ask me, said, if you had unlimited funding, what would you do? And I immediately said housing, and talked about how housing is such a need for the clients that we're seeing that are coming through. And apparently I was a little bit too convincing when I was talking about it, because they said, that's great. Yeah, we want to work with you and we want to partner with you on that. And that kind of set us on the path that we're on here today to be able to offer the housing for individuals returning from incarceration, and other things just kind of fell into place with the developer here of the property, with the partnership with the county jail, and getting the right people to be able to do the jobs as well. So we're very blessed to be able to be where we're at right now.
And right now we're downtown just off 10th and State Street. Can you describe this location and building and why Project Return chose it?
Yeah, this building used to be the old St. Anthony's Hospital, and then it got converted into the Community Corrections Center, which was the Huber facility for the county jail. And during those years, it really fell into disrepair to the point that it really needed to be completely gutted. And that happened, and then Heartland Alliance moved in, and just they could not be able to continue functioning and providing the housing that was needed here. So the developer, Zuena Cotton, came in and was kind of not pressured, but the city really wanted her to be able to take over and remodel the building and redo it here. About that time, when Zuena had gotten the building, we were in contact with her and just saying, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing with housing. And she jumped at the opportunity to be able to have us here, providing the housing here and providing services here at this building. So, like I said, everything kind of just really fell into place. Things started happening, and it's like, oh, this is perfect. This really works for us.
I think what I always think about when I come into our office space now is we're in between the jail, the courthouse, and Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility. And when I think about that, I think about the guys and the trauma. Sometimes I think about is that going to be too much for them in this building? And what I'd like to say to that is, we're here. We're not going anywhere. And just because you're next door to these facilities, we can work alongside it, right? And so really showing our guys that just because you've experienced incarceration doesn't mean that you can't get through it and get out of it. And really that's kind of what we're trying to do. And speaking of Zuena, there are not a lot of landlords in the state of Wisconsin that would be willing to let a project of this magnitude be in their building. And so I just am exceptionally grateful.
How does stable housing and support help to reduce recidivism or keeping people who were formerly incarcerated from being incarcerated again?
If your basic needs aren't met, if at the end of the day you have nowhere to lay your head at night, you have no food to eat, and you have no idea how you're going to shower the next day to even get up and go to a job interview, it's pretty difficult to figure out how to get out of that cycle. I happen to be a person that didn't have to worry about that, which is why it's always been so heavy on my heart to help people that don't have that ability. I think putting people back to work, these guys are smart. They come back out, they're professionals, they're going to be in our community. 95% of the people that have been incarcerated are going to be back in our communities. So I think it behooves us to give them a leg up, right? Not a handout, we're helping, right? And so really helping them feel that they're part of the community so that they feel that love and understanding and community feel. That's what we're trying to do here. And I think once you have the basics established, the world is really kind of open to you.
How does the program work and who qualifies for it?
So right now we're only taking guys that are currently incarcerated over at the CRC. So what happens is I go over there after the CRC vets them essentially, and I do a face-to-face interview with them just to get to see where they're at, what they've been through, doing like biopsych socials, ensuring that they're ready to buy into what we're kind of giving here, right? And one of the things that I always say to them when I meet with any of them is, we don't want you to come out of jail and feel like you're coming to another jail. That's not what Project Return is. That's not who we are. And so we want you to feel like you're coming into a community and you have family and friends here who are really going to help you along the way. Our criteria is the guys can come, they come straight here from CRC. So either myself or another Project Return person goes over there and picks them up straight and brings them here. After that, they're here for 3 to 6 months, and we have case management staff here that have been here for very many years that specialize with certain kinds of services. So, for instance, if somebody needs employment assistance, they go to Eugene for FSET help. If somebody needs help with housing, Terry, who's our administrative person that does a whole bunch of things here, also does a lot of housing things. And so essentially the criteria is ensuring that they have no healthy space to go to after they leave here. They could probably be rendered homeless, which would put them back in the system more than likely. Does that happen for everybody? No, but it's incredibly difficult. So those guys that are kind of falling through the cracks, those are the guys that we're looking to pick up and bring in.
Other than managing the property, how will Project Return provide resources for residents?
We are partnering with different area organizations. So My Way Out with Ruben, we're also taking referrals from him. And we're also looking into different partnerships in the community right now. But I think you could probably touch a little bit more on that, Wendell, as well.
What the program is designed with housing is to really provide individuals this with holistic wraparound services. So making and addressing every barrier that the individual is going to be facing upon their reentry. So we're working with them to be able to help try and find stable employment, working on addiction issues, mental health issues, getting them in front of the professionals that can be able to help with those different resources, so that does not lead to maybe reincarceration or back into criminal thinking patterns or criminality. Really what we're trying to do is be able to take an individual from the day of release and get them stabilized in our community, helping them become positive, permanent members of our community. And then in time, our goal is to be able to have these individuals become leaders in our community too, to be able to speak about their experiences being incarcerated, what was needed when they got out, so that the next generation of people returning have more opportunities than what we have right now.
You're listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. I'm Eddie Morales, speaking with Wendell Rishka and Sarah Williams about Project Return's new housing initiative. What are the biggest misconceptions about people returning from incarceration?
Being here for 25 years, I'm very amazed at how resilient people are, how individuals really they could do so much with so little. And what is amazing is, like, once an individual starts to have some positive reinforcement and have some positive things happen in their lives, how that really just branches out and the individual really just kind of becomes a different person. One of the toughest things that we work with at Project Return is helping the individual recognize that they can be more than that number, more than what they've been in the past. And unfortunately, for a lot of the individuals that are returning from incarceration, a lot of individuals are going to be living here from a very early age. They were told that this is the only thing you're ever going to be, is you're only going to be that number. You're only going to be somebody that's going to be recycling through the system. And I go in institutions a lot, and when I talk with the guys in the institutions, I always say to them, like, we need you back in our community. We need you to be a part of this community. And every time I say that, there's always a group of individuals that their ears perk up, because they've never had anybody tell them that before. And so what we're really trying to do is get individuals to recognize that they can be more than what they've been in the past. They have the ability to become these leaders and be a positive asset to our community, and that they can change not only for their family and stuff, but for the community as well. I talk with individuals, and I've been doing this for many years. When I first started at Project Return, most people learn what I did, and they'd be like, "Did switch the subject pretty quick," because they didn't really want to talk about it that much. Now, when we talk, they really want to know more about how they can be involved, how they can volunteer, how they can get involved with individuals too. So I think that our community is beginning to come around to understanding that individuals returning from incarceration have value, that they can provide resources for the community and be a positive impact on the community if given the right kind of mentorship and walking with that.
Can you provide me with any statistics or anecdotes about the success and impact of initiatives like this or the work that you've both been doing?
I remember feeling as if I was never going to get back up again, and I had privilege that other people didn't have. And so really making sure what's really important for me in this program is ensuring that the guys know that they're here, they're not a number, that they feel heard and seen from the moment that they walk into their apartment. Everything is brand new. Like, when I tell them that, when I go and do interviews with them, they're pretty blown away. I said, you don't have to worry about anything. Do I need to bring anything? No, you don't. Like, we just want you to feel how we need you to feel, right? And I don't know that they've ever been given that opportunity before. So I think being able to give them that hopefully will show them, like, this is where I belong, this is where I'm supposed to be, and help motivate and move them forward. Other programs, I think, are very helpful, but this program specifically is very different. And I'm grateful to be able to be a part of this. I also have worked with guys that have been on the inside and gotten out, that have been in temporary living programs, really put their all into it, and now work for places like the Remington Center out in Madison, or for the Innocence Project. And that's something to be said about us, like, in our hearts. Somebody that's educated can go to school and learn about statistics and all of these things and what incarceration does to family and cycles of trauma, but I really believe that the people that can do the best work here are the ones that are most passionate about it, are ones that have felt that pain before and are willing to pull people out as well. So one of my big things that I would love to see, and I think that we definitely are going to strive towards that, is these guys that we get housed, that, get back with their families. One of the first things guys always say to me when they go in there, "Can I see my kids?" Of course you can see your kids. We encourage you to see your children. And yes, absolutely. So those guys, I can envision them being alumni here, right? And then mentoring the next squad of guys that come through. And so really it's like that ripple effect we want to see in the community, and it starts here.
Sarah Williams is the housing director for Project Return, and Wendell Rishka is the executive director of Project Return. They both spoke with WUWM's Eddie Morales about how they're providing housing for people in Milwaukee County after incarceration. Season 2 of Swing State of the Union is here, and this time we're looking at the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The second episode, called Partisan Judgment, is out now. It explores how court races have changed over the past 30 years, and why this supposedly nonpartisan election feels so partisan. In this piece, co-host Sam Woods and I explore what court races were like in the 1990s, and why political parties are interested in controlling the court. Courts are one of the 3 branches of our government and are meant to be a part of the political process. But Wisconsin jurists aren't supposed to be partisans, meaning they shouldn't align with one party or the other. But political parties have become heavily involved in Wisconsin Supreme Court elections. So how did we get here?
When former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Janine Geske was first appointed to fill a vacancy on the bench in 1993 by Republican Governor Tommy Thompson, things were very different. At the time, it was customary for potential justices to seek out endorsements from officials across the political spectrum.
I had prior Democratic governors On my list of supporters as honorary co-chairs, I would have plaintiffs' lawyers and defense lawyers. I would have public defenders and district attorneys. I would try to show that I was respected in the bar by all sides of litigation and that they trusted me as a judge to decide matters.
Geske says the appointment process involved some political jockeying, but she felt it focused more on the candidates' judicial credentials and not on the expected outcomes of the cases they would rule on.
In 1994, Justice Geske was handily elected to serve a full term. According to J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, that was common for Supreme Court races, even into the early 2000s.
Believe it or not, we had a string of races in the early 2000s where the incumbents weren't even challenged. I mean, it was hard to find judges who wanted to challenge an incumbent justice because really the race was about your experience, if you were a judge, period, and your endorsements. You didn't talk about values or cases. They were really kind of quiet affairs.
Justice Geske, who chose to leave the court in 1998, says she appreciated the atmosphere of the court, where jurists with different opinions were able to civilly discuss and debate the merits of a case.
People come from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different experiences, and you bring all that into your own decision-making. You know, I always understood why my colleagues were going the direction they were going. I was often surprised where they went, which is another sign to me that you can't predict. You know, I would even look at a case before oral argument and think, gee, I wonder if it's going to go this way or that way.
It's hard to pinpoint exactly when things began to shift. Some point to the election of 1999, when Justice Shirley Abrahamson was up for re-election. For the first time in modern memory, members of the Supreme Court publicly endorsed the candidate running against Abrahamson. But that may have come down to differences in personalities.
But it was the 2008 Wisconsin Supreme Court election that really turned heads. The incumbent Justice Louis Butler faced a well-funded challenger, then-Judge Michael Gableman, who had previously served as the Republican District Attorney in Ashland, Wisconsin, and had little experience compared to Butler. It was an unusual situation without precedent in Wisconsin Supreme Court races. As Justice Geske explains, it seemed to stem from decisions made by the court in the year leading up to the election.
They were monumental decisions that came out the end of that term with Justice Butler, and one dealt with medical malpractice and limits, and one did with lead paint and product liability. These cases came booming out of the court, and the business community and manufacturers and others went nuts. Then they were divided opinions, and Justice Butler either wrote them or were on them, and he was the next one up. They looked very long and hard to find somebody to run against him. I can tell you, I don't know how many judges I talked to across the state that were approached to ask whether they run against Justice Butler, and most people said no. He was an excellent justice. But they ultimately found Justice Gableman, and he obviously consented. And, you know, in my view, was a much weaker candidate, but was successful because of the campaigning these groups did.
By most accounts, the campaign was ugly, and for the first time in Wisconsin history, expensive. According to the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, the race cost nearly $6 million, including nearly $5 million from outside special interest groups. Here's J.R. Ross again.
That was the first time you saw some kind of interesting money flow into a race. There was an ethics complaint against Gableman after that race because of an ad he ran against Butler that was misleading.
The ad in question was described as a Willie Horton-style ad, a notoriously racist ad from the 1988 presidential election that prominently featured a photo of a black man convicted of murder. Justice Butler was the first and only black person to serve on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The most well-known attack ad against him featured a photo of Butler next to a photo of another black man who had been Butler's client when he was a lawyer. Here's a clip of that ad, which mentioned sexual assault of a child.
Louis Butler worked to put criminals on the street, like Reuben Lee Mitchell, who raped an 11-year-old girl with learning disabilities. Butler found a loophole. Mitchell went on to molest another child. Can Wisconsin families feel safe with Louis Butler on the Supreme Court?
The ad led to an ethics charge against Gableman by the Wisconsin Judicial Commission. in part due to a misleading claim that Justice Butler had been involved in getting the man featured in the ad released. Critics blasted the ad as racist and defamatory, but the damage had been done. For the first time since 1967, an incumbent Wisconsin Supreme Court justice lost re-election, but it wouldn't be the last time.
Since 2008, Wisconsin Supreme Court races have attracted more attention and more money. Philip Rocco, a political science professor from Marquette University, explains what that's looked like.
They are, in name, nonpartisan elections, but in reality, parties themselves and mega donors associated with political parties have in recent years contributed tens of millions of dollars to candidates sort of on both sides of the ideological spectrum.
But there's a reason that partisan groups have chosen to put more and more money into these races. How the Supreme Court rules can have a huge impact on politics in the state.
The reality is, important political issues, if they matter, if they get tracked through the legislative process, they're eventually going to come before the court too, especially when you have a governor that is of one party, a state legislature that is of another party, and especially when there are questions that involve the scope of the legislature's powers, which really have increased in recent years. The court is ultimately going to get summoned to make what is a very politically important choice about the structure of government in the state of Wisconsin.
Throughout much of the 2010s, Republicans had full control of Wisconsin's government, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court also leaned conservative. In 2018, after Democrat Tony Evers defeated Republican Scott Walker to become Wisconsin's governor, the Wisconsin Supreme Court would yet again play a role in partisan politics.
The Republican-controlled Wisconsin legislature approved a sweeping package of bills weakening the incoming Democratic governor and attorney general. The state assembly approved the lame duck legislation this morning.
In the months between Election Day and Evers taking office, Republican legislators passed a series of lame duck laws that limited the incoming Democratic governor and attorney general's powers. Powers that their Republican colleagues in those offices had enjoyed for the previous 8 years.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court upheld these laws as constitutional in an ideologically split decision that saw conservative-leaning justices siding with Republicans and liberal-leaning justices siding with Democrats. For Philip Rocco, political scientist at Marquette University, this case demonstrated how important the court would become in a divided government.
It's a great example, I think, of how in Wisconsin, a state that in recent years has had a governor's office that has trended in the Democratic column and a legislature that has trended in the Republican column, the Supreme Court, which is fairly closely divided, has really become a kind of fulcrum institution in state politics in ways that will leave an indelible mark on the structure of Wisconsin political institutions for decades to come.
That was part of Swing State of the Union Episode 2, called Partisan Judgment. The podcast is hosted by myself and Sam Woods. The first 2 episodes of Season 2 are available now. You can find it at wuwm.com and wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every Wednesday, leading up to the April general election. You can also hear it tomorrow at noon, right here on WUWM. And just like Swing State of the Union, Lake Effect is also a podcast. Search for Lake Effect wherever you get your podcasts to download and listen on demand. Later in the show, we'll bring you a new episode of Bubbler Talk. But first, we'll learn how crews keep Milwaukee's trees healthy and how they're adapting to changing weather. That's coming up next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. Winter is prime pruning time for trees, and it's one of the ways the city is working to keep our urban canopy healthy. WUWM environmental reporter Susan Benz visited a crew doing some pruning to learn how they're adapting to climate change. She spoke with Randy Krause, the city's urban forestry manager, on the city's northwest side, while a crew worked in the background.
We manage up to 194,000 street tree sites throughout the city. We also manage 120 miles of green space, mainly boulevards. We also manage greenhouse and nursery operations. So most of our trees that we actually plant on the street are grown by us in our nursery. And a lot of the flowers that you see out on the boulevards are also grown by us in our greenhouses. Ways we have evolved over the years is we continue to diversify our street tree population, which is really important from the standpoint of maintaining a sustainable urban forest, especially in the face of not only climate change, but also pests, diseases, and insects of trees. So it's really important that you diversify your urban forest as much as possible to withstand the rigors of that. So.
And are you looking at species now that you weren't when you started, in that diversification?
Yeah, one kind of interesting thing that we're doing is we're trying to stay in front of climate change because, as you may know, our hardiness zone has changed here in Milwaukee. Changed to a zone 6, which is causing us to look at other tree species that may have been, marginally hardy here at one time, and now maybe bringing those into our urban forests. Some examples of that would be tulip poplar trees, black gum trees. We're looking at buckeyes. So some of those trees that normally are indigenous a little bit farther south to us, we're starting to bring in, and we're experimenting with those trees to see if they'll grow for us.
Where do you do those experimentations? Just wherever you might need a tree?
We started with our nursery. We order those in small numbers. We put them in our nursery fields. First and foremost, we want to see if they will grow and survive within our nursery. Once they get to harvestable size, then we plant them out on the street. And then that's the second phase of the experiment is, will they now survive out on the street? And once they do that, and we see that, and this we've seen with the tulip poplar trees, is if they survive on the street for us, then we'll up the numbers of those in our nursery and start growing more of those and start integrating those more into our urban forest.
You have crews out through the winter pruning the entire canopy?
Correct. This is our main pruning time. So most of the trees that we prune are done during the winter time when the trees are dormant. That's the best time to prune trees. And most of the time they are done by climbers. We also have lift trucks that prune some of our larger mature canopy. But most of it is done by tree climbers, our apprentices, and journey worker arborists. We have started an apprenticeship crew. We started that in 2018. And that's a rigorous training program. They go through up to 4 years to learn all the skill sets to become a professional arborist, to take care of our canopy. And once they pass through that program, they become journey worker arborists for us. And one of the skill sets, as you can see, they learn is tree climbing skills, so they can prune and remove our trees safely and also replant our trees.
So these trees are, what are these guys, the species?
These are all ash trees along here.
They are, each side. Would these have been treated? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Most of our ash trees on the street are treated to protect them from emerald ash borer.
Right.
We started doing that in 2009 and been treating our ash canopy ever since. We have approximately a little under 26,000 ash trees out on the street, which is about a 13% of our overall population. But it's larger canopy that's really important. It provides very important benefits for our communities. Stormwater retention, moderating heat stress, obviously through the shade, cleaning the air, cleaning our water. So they contribute a lot to our communities and our environment.
Are winters in particular impacting the health of the canopy, or how does winter weather factor into the overall sustainability of the canopy?
I will say this, and I know I keep talking about climate change, but in my mind that's a real thing. From what I can noticed is that we get a lot more severe storms. And it's really important that we maintain our trees properly, especially pruning trees, which our crews are doing right here, to withstand the rigors of those, more severe storms. Set the trees up for a proper structure.
Right, so that meaning that they're maintaining their strength and endurance by doing that pruning, for example?
Yeah, that just means they get a stronger structure.
Yeah.
It's really important, even with the younger trees, that we set that structure up properly, so when they grow to mature size, they can withstand higher winds and stronger storms.
And how would you describe that perfect structure?
More of a central leader. We always try to establish more of a central leader in the tree with smaller lateral leads that kind of radiate out from that central leader is kind of like the perfect tree. Now, you're not always going to have the perfect structure, but that's what us arborists do, is try to maintain that structure as good as possible throughout the life of the tree.
So in general, when trees reach this age, can they withstand most conditions that they've been experiencing?
Yes, most of the trees all the trees that we plant out on the street, except for the experimental ones I'm talking about, can withstand, the colder temperatures. We've been doing this long enough. We know what species of trees can survive out on the street, because they do grow in a kind of a more of a harsher environment.
Sure.
So we pretty much got that down, but again, we experiment with different species and try to diversify as much as possible.
So when you plant a tree, are there critical times in that tree's development or growing that are most important, that if something happens, if they're hit with a drought or whatever, that it's really tough for them to make it?
It would be from planting time through their establishment period.
And
that's typically anywhere from, as that young tree is planted into the ground, it then has to grow out roots so it can find resources such as water, right, minerals and nutrients. Anywhere from 2 to 3 years is that establishment period. Might be a little longer for some other species, maybe up to 4 to 5 years for establishment period. But that is a critical time where it's really important that when we plant trees, it's important to follow up with maintenance, especially watering, mulching, and young tree pruning. Yeah.
So that's part of your routine.
Yeah, that is definitely part of our routine.
Yeah.
That's why we have professional arborists on staff to help take care of these trees. It's not just about planting trees to increase canopy and sustain canopy. It's actually the maintenance of those trees after you plant them is super important.
Sure. So can you guesstimate how many trees that means?
Yeah, so we plant up to about 3,600 trees per year.
Whoa.
Most of them get planted in the springtime because that's our harvest time. And then another harvest time out of our nursery is in the fall time when we plant the other portion of those trees. And that's due to because, as trees age out or they get broken up in storms or they get declined because of disease or insects or whatever, then we have to remove those trees. We then go through that process and make sure we reforest and replant after that so we have a sustainable tree population throughout the city.
Randy Krause is the urban forestry manager for the city of Milwaukee. He spoke with WUWM's environmental reporter Susan Bentz. In about 15 minutes, we'll bring you our new season of Bubbler Talk. We'll kick it off with a tour of Milwaukee's skywalks. But first, we'll explore the history of Les Petits Bonbons, a group of radical gay activists from Milwaukee.
These were 7 boys from Milwaukee who skyrocketed to international celebrity status, hobnobbed with people like David Bowie and Iggy Pop and Lou Reed.
That's next on Lake Effect, on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. Les Petits Bonbons was a group of gay activists that formed in the early 1970s in Milwaukee. They ultimately went down in history for their impact on Hollywood's glitter rock scene. It's something that Michael Takash wrote about for Milwaukee Magazine last year. That's when he joined me to share the history of Les Petits Bonbons. So this is a kind of big question, which, we'll unpack throughout this conversation, but who were Les Petits Bonbons?
The group is really a bit of an enigma. I mean, they really started as, just a group of disaffected young activists who were really looking to reinvent the world. They really thought that on this dawn of gay liberation, in the first few years following the Stonewall Uprising, that a revolution was coming, and that they would be the bringers of change, whether it be through direct activism or through this new form of art, sex, and expression that they were hoping to create for the world. The group was born out of the gay liberation movement in Milwaukee, centered around UW Milwaukee, where Barbara Gibson, a student faculty advisor, had stepped forward to found the first gay rights group at UWM, which was known initially as the Homosexual Freedom League. Within a few weeks, that group renamed itself the Gay Liberation Organization, and a splinter group broke off that was known as Gay Liberation Front. The idea was that the GLO was much more interested in having social events and having kind of togetherness and unity. And the GLF was more interested in marching in the streets, breaking windows, and really drawing attention to themselves in a way that had never been done before. So some of the members of these different and certainly disparately minded groups came together in other forms, one of which was the Radical Queens, which was a group that came together. And this, again, was a very defiant, very unapologetic, very, I think we would today call them queer first activists who really sought to, again, challenge the status quo, really draw attention to the burgeoning gay rights movement, really make people think and question and even fear, because, in their words, gay people had been scared long enough, and now it was time for the rest of the world to be scared of gay people. The idea of Les Petits Bonbons was born as a stage show for these radical queens, who again were a derivative of those earlier gay liberation groups. Mm-hmm. Although the show was never produced, a photo shoot was. And this photo shoot by the legendary Milwaukee photographer, Francis Ford, really put the Bonbons on the map. It really made them look like they were someone, that they were famous, that they were celebrities. And at this point, they had not yet really done much of anything.
Now, it seems like a lot of, at least the origins of this group, but also kind of what continued to be one of their most known assets was their look. What did this group really look like?
So it's interesting because this early 70s window of time is a real intersection of the gay liberation movement and the glam rock movement. And the Bonbons kind of synthesized those two into a really confrontational look, some of whom incorporated what they called scare drag or gender fluid costumery, and others did no drag at all. So it was really quite of a spectrum, quite a diversity of people who looked very different, acted very different, and lived very differently, all within this same traveling circus effect. But other members of the group did not do drag at all. I mean, they just, kind of had this really hip, very now, very sophisticated, but very trendy glam rock look. I think that they described it as kind of an acid trip meets Alice in Wonderland that shopped at a thrift store. I mean, it was really grassroots, but ultra cutting edge, and it really defined the era. I think that what's most telling is that, their look was so captivating to photographers that not only did they appear in Francis Ford's photo shoot, after they relocated to California, they appeared in music and fashion magazines all over the world. And in fact, a famous photo that was taken in early 1973 of the two main Bonbons outside of Rodney Bingenheimer's English Disco was circulated worldwide by UPI and caused an international fashion sensation. I mean, they overnight were famous simply for being famous.
You mentioned, when one of them was on the cover of a newspaper here in Milwaukee. This was something that was, in and of itself, pretty radical at the time. This was a very Milwaukee movement. Milwaukee and maybe Cudahy, we should add into that Milwaukee area. How would you describe their cultural impact specifically here in Milwaukee?
Well, you have to keep in mind that the majority of this group, of which there were essentially 7 to 8 members, most of these were just teenagers from South Milwaukee and Cudahy. And as somebody who grew up on the South Shore, that's what I found most fascinating about this story. These weren't people who grew up in a very liberal, intellectual, very artistic background. I mean, these were people who grew up with parents who worked very blue collar manufacturing jobs, the very traditional Milwaukee jobs. And somehow they found their calling and they found each other. And they really shattered the status quo in not only Milwaukee, but later Los Angeles and the American music scene. These were 7 boys from Milwaukee who skyrocketed to international celebrity status, hobnobbed with people like David Bowie and Iggy Pop and Lou Reed, people from Andy Warhol's factory, and then just kind of moved on with their lives. One thing I really think is important about this story is how the story unfolded. And the fact that, not only are most people not aware of this, glam rock gay liberation group, but the Wisconsin LGBTQ History Project was not fully aware of them either. So we had heard their name in passing. We had heard of some of the names of the members. We knew that there was a thing called the bonbons, but we didn't really understand what it was or when it was or how big of a deal it was until Chucky Betts passed away last fall and his family willed his photo collection to the History Project. Now, this is really an important part of the story because typically when an LGBTQ elder dies, his family, his survivors, have no idea what to do with those materials. It could be photos, it could be memorabilia, and it is extremely rare that a family member will take the time to seek out someone to be the beneficiary of that history. And the challenge that we have is so much of that history has already been lost. The AIDS crisis erased nearly an entire generation of people and took their history and their lived experiences with them. And I can only be grateful to the Betts family for sharing his wealth of photos with us, because it is through that process that we uncovered this secret history of the bonbons and this fabulous story about 7 young men who somehow created themselves as the first social influencers and the first self-made celebrities.
What do you think is the lasting legacy of their movement?
There's quite a bit to that question. I think that the first one is that as we look at what Pride Month looks like today, and then we look at these pioneers, these people who were truly the first to stand up and be willing to be seen and be willing to sacrifice everything and be willing to fight for what they believed in, I think that their legacy is to question if we've gotten too comfortable, if we've gotten too complacent, if we've settled back into that world that they were born into, where everything was just the way it was and there was no questioning or changing it. Their legacy is one of accountability to drive action, to constantly invent a better future, and to really drive thought, looking at the lives that they led. I think we have an opportunity and an obligation as a community to constantly fight for something better and to not worry about making people comfortable, not making people feel safe with us, not making people feel that we'll settle for tolerance. We're not here just to be tolerated. We're here to be equal. They didn't want to be pretty. They didn't want to be straight, and they didn't necessarily want to be accepted, but they did want to be seen. They wanted to be known, and they wanted people to know that they were not going to change to make people happy, safe, or comfortable with them. So they were here to disrupt society and to create a new society, and as a result. And I think that that's something that, has gotten a little bit lost in recent years. Having spoken to some of the surviving bonbons, they truly believed their movement was going to change the world. And, it's up to us to keep that change in motion.
For sure. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect.
Thank you.
Michael Takash is a historian and chair of the Wisconsin LGBTQ History Project. We spoke last year. Bubbler Talk is back. That's WUWM series where you tell us what you're curious about in the Milwaukee area. Then we work with you to get to the bottom of the question. To kick off our new season, WUWM editor and project manager Emily Files took to the sky. Well, the skywalks.
Bubbler Talk, quenching Milwaukee's thirst for knowledge.
I'm WUWM's Emily Files. On today's Bubbler Talk, we're going to spend some time in the enclosed bridges that crisscross downtown Milwaukee, the skywalks. Chris and Billy Dawn Scoggin were walking in downtown Milwaukee on a winter evening when they looked up and started wondering.
And it was kind of cold, and I saw the skywalks. I thought, I remember the skywalks. I wonder if you could do that in really cold weather to get from one place to another without getting cold. And Billy Dawn said, you should ask Bubbler Talk.
And Bubbler Talk answered their call. All right, so I am here in Milwaukee's skywalk system. I'm all the way at the east end of the public system in the Drury Plaza Hotel. It's at Wisconsin and Water. And I'm going to be walking west all the way to the other end of the skywalk system to the Baird Convention Center. The about 2-mile-long skywalk system is open to the public during the day. Going through some doors here into the next part of the skywalk. And this one is interesting. It actually has a shoe shine station that I don't think is in use any longer, but it's still here. Matt Dorner, Economic Development Director for Milwaukee's Downtown Business Improvement District, says the skywalks are mainly used by people who work or live in the buildings they connect.
There's currently over 300 apartment units directly connected to the skywalk. And then also you're connected to over 2,000 hotel rooms directly off the main line of the skywalk system.
Most of Milwaukee's skywalks were built between the late 1970s and early 1990s. Rob Schneider, an urban planning professor at UWM, says Milwaukee followed the lead of cities like Minneapolis in creating downtown skywalks. Although Milwaukee's skywalk system is much smaller than the one in Minneapolis, which is almost 10 miles long.
This was a way to bring pedestrian activity up from street level, where there were an increasing number of cars, to another level where the pedestrians wouldn't need to interact with the cars. It also allowed pedestrians to be in a climate-controlled area. So during the winter or the really hot months of the summer, they could be traveling indoors.
A 1974 Milwaukee Journal article reported that Mayor Henry Meyer proposed skywalks as part of a downtown revitalization plan. But as they were constructed, not everyone was in favor. Mayor John Norquist, who was elected after Meyer, thought the skywalks would hurt businesses at the street level. And there were aesthetic concerns. One official in 1988 called the skywalks gerbil tubes for people. A proposal to extend the skywalk system further east toward the lake didn't have enough support. Rob Schneider says even though Milwaukee's skywalks are open to the public, they can be difficult to access and navigate.
People who are coming for the first time or accessing the city and into downtown may not know exactly where to go. And so that gives a certain level of exclusivity to the skywalk system, which isn't the same as if you're walking along the street.
Milwaukee's Downtown Business Improvement District is working to get the word out about the skywalks. They have a map of the system available online. And recently they partnered with a group called Girls Who Walk to lead a walk through the system. Emily Pierce was there pushing her 2 young kids in a stroller.
I have not been in the skywalks ever before after 3 years of living here, so this is a really cool option.
Have you ever wondered about them?
Yes, driving around town when you see the glass bridges and people walking, it's really odd and never knowing how to get into them. But now that I know where we gotta go, it's gonna be a lot more accessible.
And our Bubbler Talk question askers, Chris and Billy Dawn Scoggin, they took a historic Milwaukee tour that introduces people to the skywalks, so they are now skywalkers. And next time they're in downtown Milwaukee in the winter, they know they can find refuge from the cold in the skywalks.
What have you always wanted to know about the Milwaukee area? Visit wuwm.com/bubblertalk to submit your question. And join us April 10th at Gathering Place Brewing Company in River West for Bubbler Talk Trivia. Register to attend at wuwm.com.
Bubbler Talk wraps up Lake Effect for today. I'm Joy Powers. Audrey Nowakowski, Sam Woods, and Excrement Nunez join me in producing Lake Effect each week, with help from Rob Larry and Graham Thomas. Becky Mortensen is our executive producer. Emily Files helps edit the show. This week, we also heard from Jimmy Gutierrez, Catherine Kokel, Eddie Morales, and Susan Benz from the WUWM News team. Jason Reevy is our studio engineer. Michelle Maternowski is our digital manager. Valeria Navarro Viegas is our digital editor. Trapper Shep wrote our theme music. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And thank you so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.